Okay, welcome to AAC, what SLPs need to know about seating, positioning, movement, and access. And I put most of this class together, and Kristen Leslie, the occupational therapist that works for Special Ed Technology Center and actually runs the place, also added a few slides, so I'm excited to share some of her information as well. So what this is about access, and a lot of times as speech language pathologists we decide that that is not our domain, or we know it's not our domain. However, there are a few things that you need to know and that drastically improve the access, especially to communication devices. So I actually was fortunate enough to go to Adaptive Switch Lab in Texas, and it is primarily for occupational and physical therapists, but I went and it changed the way every single day of therapy since I went there. And I learned 100% of the concepts there, but nothing teaches like actually putting your hands on bodies. So I'm excited to show you some video as well. We are going to just talk about the differences between seating for postural management and postural control, and what that looks like in the school setting as well as home, and what research says about all this as far as level of alertness and how it affects learning and therefore communication. So it's a big stuff. Access is how an individual is able to manage an activity of interest with intention independently. So access is not hand over hand. Access is not hand under hand. Access is what movement can they do voluntarily, intentionally, and independently most of the time. We're not robots, so 100% is probably not reliable, especially if you have a cerebral palsy or some spasticity in your movements. They don't have 100% control of their bodies, but we're looking for intentional, independent movement. And access is also how we manage a particular machine at a particular time for a specific activity, which produces an output, which means that it's very intentional, every single thing about it. And there's timing involved, which is also hard for some of our bodies. So the big thing is where do we put that switch? And I'm going to just show you this. Forgive me if you've seen the video in a different class before. This is my OT, Melanie Knatzer, who is attempting to use this switch so that she can drive this car. And if she holds the switch down, the car will go. And if the switch is placed in front of her, she needs hand over hand support, as well as she cannot move her hand without looking at her hand. So she has CP, and so she's having to do that with her head and body to make her hand participate. So let's look at this video.
Are you driving a car right now? Because you drive a car. Hold your head up and you'll go.
There it is.
Look at you.
This is one of my favorite videos. If you're watching me, I can't help but smile while I'm watching this video. For one, because she's adorable. And two is the magic that is, as soon as they put the switch behind her head, she actually independently sat straight up. The only support required was a little bit of hand support on her shoulders. She doesn't have any straps on her right now in this car. And we probably do need a shoulder strap to help her shoulders stay back. But her posture is better. She can see where she is going. So she sees the effect of the switch much better. And we're using something that she has control over, which is her head. So right off the bat, this has nothing to do with communication or speech therapy, but sometimes movement is the activity that creates enough motivation to show intentional body movement. So touching the switch to make the car go is motivating, and it lets me show you that I can move my head, because I'm really motivated to hit the switch. So let's see if I can move forward. So there's direct select where we're using our hands. There's adapted direct select with key guards and mouse and stylus and eye gaze. And then there's indirect access, which is switch access. And all of those are optional for, are options for a variety, for most devices. And a lot of devices have some or all of these. Meaning not all devices can do eye gaze, but most devices can have a key guard. And not all devices have auditory preview for switch access, but most do. So this is the physical access of pieces. So if you don't understand the physical access to the communication device, you're missing a big part of the boat. And it's nothing we learn in school as speech language pathologists. And honestly, it's not a lot that we learn in school, even as a paraeducator or even as a nurse. We don't have a lot of background in, sorry about my dogs. That's happening in the background right there. We don't have a lot of or any experience with thinking about physical access, but it's a huge part of AAC, isn't it? So let's just hammer this for a minute. And a lot of this I got from Karen Kangas, if you ever get a chance to see her live do it. So consistency, efficiency, reliability are engineering terms and not human terms, nor human physiological terms. So we are using those lightly when we say we want consistency, we want reliability, in as consistent as reliable as a human can be. Isolated motor is not consistent nor reliable, but rather process-oriented, routine, independent, and adaptive. And again, if you read some of her articles and your background is not OT or PT, it can kind of blow your mind. But motor control is not consistent. We have different motor control based on the process that we're supposed to do. Walking is a gross motor. Sometimes we'll stop walking in order to make our fingers do something. I don't know if you guys have seen this. I mean, where people stop to text and then they keep walking because they really can't put it all together. So we're never error-free. We're never mistake-proof. But we are able to recognize our motor errors and make the adjustments, not without necessarily requiring linguistic instruction. I don't know if that, so for example, sometimes with a key guard on a communication device, if you go to touch it and it's wrong and they hear that it says, I want ball, and they meant to do bubbles, they shake their head at the device, they move their finger over one tactile button and hit bubbles, and then they smile. And you haven't had to say, no, that's not the one you wanted. Move over. You know what? You need to go to your right. It's the one here. Let me help your hand do it. We don't need necessarily to say much or do much, but let that motor plan work itself out. Let them hear the results of the way they just access the device, and let them make their own adjustments to their body to access it differently. And that way they can stay working towards motor. You know, typical kids when they're growing, a lot of times we'll hear from people like, I don't know if I need a speech referral. He talks a lot, but he hasn't talked lately. And then you say, what's going on? And they say, well, you know, he had like 5 or 6 words and now he's trying to walk and now I got nothing. I just get grunts. And it's like, right now he's so focused on his motor that his language system is kind of at caveman. So when somebody is trying so hard to move their bodies to access language, they really can't take in a lot of receptive language at the same time. And you'll see it. As a speech pathologist, as helpful as she is, tries to give verbal instructions related to any part of the AAC, they stop, they put their hands down, they look at the person, or they close their eyes, they shut down. It's like, I can't think about what my body has to do and take in words from you. So letting your body make a mistake and improve on them, and then letting your child try to do their body in a different way is often the best way to help a child refine their access method. So when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And I love the quote, and I continue to try to look at things from another angle. And it's really, really helped me to look at bodies and to look at OTs and speech therapists and their wait time that they provide often. So sometimes the occupational therapists that I work on with, all they will say is, what do you need to do? What does your body need to do? They're not focusing on the AAC, even though the AAC is right in front of them. And then you'll see them, they'll either straighten up or they'll move things around and they'll get there. So first we have to have interest, and then we get to have access. We can't say, well, first we have to access all this stuff and then it will be exciting. It doesn't really work that way. So access sites develop from interest, intention, and experience, and not in isolation. So you don't work on access. You bring something exciting and new and novel into their environment, and then the way that they move their body to participate reveals their access method or what they have in control. Here's some background noise, so just a second here.
Sorry, Brenda, I was just trying to figure that out.
It's all right. I'm thinking that I'm just going to try to pause. So consistency is not necessarily what we need, meaning we don't want them to, we're not going for, will they hit the switch 10 times for the same toy? So will they hit the switch 10 times consistently, but maybe the switch is doing something of interest that grabs their attention, and therefore it's different every time. So we have to be building interest. And I think that's really a struggle in the school district, because we have limited things that are switch accessible, or we have limited things that are switch accessible that matches the sensory system of the complicated body. And by that, I mean, maybe you only have one vibrating toy, but their vision is so low. You have other switch activated toys, but they don't really, the kid can't do them because they're on a computer screen that he can't see, or it's more of a visual toy and they're not able to visually attend to it. So sometimes it's difficult. What we have done here is we've used battery interrupters and just purchased regular toys at Target that meet the sensory needs, so that we can continue to keep the interest level high and the attention high by having a variety of switch opportunities to match the sensory system in front of you. So mistakes are made. We all learn from our mistakes more, and we learn from mistakes for a couple of ways. Sometimes we learn from the mistake that the switch is too far away, and sometimes they learn from the mistake that they hit that twice. So they once turned it on and once turned it off, and they have to only hit it once if they want to keep it on. And so they're learning through their body movements as well. Just like when you're learning to ride a bike, you learn every time you have to put your foot down, right? You learn, oh, I was leaning too far that way. Oh, I was leaning too far the other way. So we're always learning through our movements. So this is going to this is such an exciting time during the sessions when you're watching this body. So, we expect real access to be revealed rather than taught. So I'm not going in saying, I'm going to show you how to hit the switch with your hand when they have never had good hand movement. I'm going to let the OT have a separate goal about hand movement. And when I'm going to look at access for communication, we're going to teach something that they can already do. So I'm going to be playing around with a switch, perhaps, that vibrates or that makes music go. And I'm going to place it in different parts of their bodies, like you saw with Natalie and her car, and figure out which one can she not only do, but that allows her to still visually attend and even learn from her environment, meaning the switch is not in such a challenging position that it takes her whole body and her visual attention to activate the switch. So if you were to this is much more exciting when we do this live, but if you were to look around a room, if we could all see each other's posture right now. Nobody is sitting in the same position. I can tell you right now. Some of you have your ankles crossed. Some of you have your legs crossed. Some of you are sitting 90 because you are trying to stay awake. Some of you are laying down right now watching this. So, and it doesn't necessarily mean you're not paying attention. So we make a lot of assumptions based on seating, on level of alertness, and I would caution you about that. So but this is a big deal thing. There is seating for task performance, and there is seating for rest. So when you are being passive, and by the way, a lot of our kids in wheelchairs are seated for passivity. They're seated for I forget what it's called, for postural, not postural passivity, sort of. So because they can't engage all the time to keep their head up, and they can't engage their core all the time, and they have just been transported from home to school on the bus, and that seating system is for safety as well. But when we are seated for a task and we need a level of alertness, it might mean that you're tilting the chair forward a little. And it definitely means that we're making sure that we understand where weight is being distributed. So seating for anyone cannot be singular. None of us sit the same every day. And sometimes our kids are too strapped in to a chair to move. So they're in the same position all day, every day. And most of us have excellent speech special ed teachers that are really good about making sure that kids don't stay in their chairs all day. And they have standards and large bean bags and other seating systems in their classroom to fit the variety of bodies so that people aren't staying in the same position all day. When we leave a child or a student in the same position all day, we will see shutdown, and we will hear that kids sleep all day. And when we get involved and we move their seatings around, lo and behold, they're awake. So the level of alertness is that there's a certain amount of shutdown if we require a student to remain in a singular posture. So here we go, postural management. Postural management is that recline with knees higher than the hips. The feet can be on the floor or on foot plates. It's safe for transport. The body is still, relaxation is necessary. And it's not a bad position for swallowing, although that recline is a little extreme in the picture here for swallow. There's a concept. Listen, if you're an SLP, you might not have even heard this, and you might not be beating this drum, and that's a good thing because we don't have to unlearn this. There was a concept that 90-90-90 was important, and without that, kids were not right. And we still often, wheelchairs are fit with this concept as 90 at the hips, 90 at the knees, 90 at the ankles. What you need to know about that is the bottom two here, that children with high tone will fight belts and they will fight restriction. And as soon as you try to create the 90-90, they will actually increase their tone and flatten out in as much as they can, often thrusting the pelvis forward and reclining them even further. Children with low tone, when forced to sit at this 90-90-90, will often collapse, which is what you saw with Natalie. As soon as if she was forced to be too much 90-90, she was going to crumple forward on you. So active seating is postural control. So there's postural management, which is passive, and active sitting is postural control. So that sitting is designed to make the students be more alert. And if you see the picture on the bottom of this slide where you're kind of pulling forward, if you sit that way, you're instantly more alert, more awake, and you look more alert and more awake because you actually are more alert and more awake, because to sit that way engages your core. And so you can't stay passive and not engage your core. So we have to figure out, what does active seating look like for each body in front of us, and what is needed for the body and the mind to be active. Again, many kids who sleep a lot at school, it's more about their seating and positioning than it is about their cognition or abilities. And messing around with making sure that they are weight bearing on their hips and not their shoulders is where you will see an increased level of alertness. Can they hold that position all day? No way. Can you position them in a way for 30 minutes during your session of speech and get a lot out of them? Absolutely, every time, all day long. I mean, unless they've just had a seizure or they've had a medical condition that change in meds, and for the first 3 days they're going to sleep. There may not be an answer for that. But for the most part, if you can get a child to be seated in an active sitting position, which means weight bearing on their hips more than their shoulders, you will see an increased level of alertness. And we got to be alert to learn. This is the second one is, so sitting is an active range of postures. It enables minds to think, eyes to see, heads, arms, and hands to accomplish tasks. It's not an immobile position, but rather an active holding position. They have to work a little bit to hold their head. They have to work a little bit to hold the position. That's what increases the level of alertness. When the pelvis is shifted forward, it results in active holding, like you saw when there's a little bit of a lean forward. Now, some of our kids don't have that head control, but just a little bit of a tilt forward will do it. The body will kick in trunk extension, tone, which further sets up increased stability. I hope some of you are rocking back and forth in your seats right now, feeling all that. This is some interesting stuff here, that children with neuromotor impairments such as hypertone are often seated in systems which they're stabilized, which means they're restricted, they're symmetrical, but it creates that very challenging to learn, integrate, and it's very challenging to integrate their sensory systems. So a lot of times mobility is a big deal. So we're looking for a switch site. Let's start with a car. Not really, but we're looking for a switch site. So let's start with something really motivating, and independent movement is something that they pretty much haven't done before. Then you're right. Actually putting them in a little car, putting them on something where, even putting them in an office chair with wheels. And if they hit the switch, you make them go. Maybe it's all manual, maybe it's all simulation, but go and movement matters, and it keeps people alert. The minute you move that kid in the office chair, they have to engage their tone to keep their balance. You're not gonna let them fall, but they don't have all the straps, and they're awake, they're alert, they're ready to go. And then they hit that switch. Maybe the switch says go, maybe it's a Big Mac. Maybe they know it's not connected, but they're still hitting a switch to make movement go. Now you're seeing where they can hit the switch, and you're looking at someone who's very alert. I love Arlene James's quote when we were there at Adaptive Switch Lab: mobility and movement is the easiest way to find interest, because they drive to something they're interested in. It's the easiest way to find intent and allowing self-initiated, self-driven, and thus engaging activity. So sometimes you can have maybe the computer in the distance, and maybe a swing in the distance, and then they have to go to be pushed over to the swing or pushed over to the computer. And again, there's still that movement piece, that I want to move and I want to pick what I want to do is part of the activity, and you get a lot of information on a body. Some of this research was really interesting. So Nilsson and Nyberg reported that children who did not achieve 100% independent mobility with powered mobility did demonstrate increased mobility. So some of these kids that use mobility as a way to learn switches, maybe they didn't become independently mobile. Maybe they didn't end up getting power chairs. The goal isn't necessarily to get a power chair, especially if you're an SLP. That's not your goal. The goal is to increase the level of alertness. So the report, then another research said that no studies reported children regressing in their motor skills once that you moved them around that way. So some of our kids that can crawl, but they can't, they're still motivated by other ways of movement, and it doesn't hinder them from moving from crawling to walking. Mobility to explore your environment by any means will increase your motor learning. As soon as you are reaching, as soon as you are walking, your cognition explodes. As soon as you are moving, as soon as you are opening a cabinet door and pulling all out the Tupperware, you're learning. You're learning. And the lack of motor learning and experiences causes secondary delays. That's an interesting fact as well, that if we can keep kids moving independently at a younger age, we see less of a delay in all the other areas. So, you know, when kids are looking at things, kids see things differently than we do. We see this as a bed, they see this as an area to move and jump. And so they may see a stack of cups. You may see a stack of cups and they see that as an opportunity to knock something down. You see it as a Cheerio and they throw it on the ground and watch you pick it up, and they see it as a game, right? Movement is involved in all of that. So children who have never had the experience to independently mobile are not going to be successful in assessment and training strategies which have been developed for adults, and that's true. Powered mobility is initially set up for adults, and it is, we expect children to pass a driver's test, and it's unrealistic, and kids learn mobility through short bursts of things. So wheelchair reps are more than happy to bring things into your school district. We have a high school robotics team that helps with our little Go Baby cars that you saw in the beginning of my presentation today. So there's ways to get mobility, but like I said, don't underestimate a wheeled office chair or even a wagon and wheels, where they're using language and switches to create their own movement. This is my guy Camden, and this is the wheelchair he showed up in that was created especially for him on the left here, and that gigantic headrest. Apparently they think that his head's going to grow. I'm not sure why that was that big, but it's not containing him anyways. And so the kid on the left there, if you ran into him at the grocery store, you would probably not talk directly to him. You might talk to the mom, and you would definitely not assume a cognitive level. Same kid, same outfit, same day. And they have created a weight-bearing situation where most of his weight is on his hips. In the first one on the left, he is leaning back. You can't tell the recline. And so he has a lot of his weight-bearing is in his shoulder girdle, or at least his upper back area, which is creating the collapse of everything else. When we shift his hips and he has to weight bear on his hips, everything else comes together. And I have a video of that, and I'm going to try to turn it up because Arlene James from Adaptive Switch Lab at the time, she's not there anymore, came to Arizona and did these evaluations with my kids, and even what she has to say is super, super helpful.
Yeah. Where's it going? There you go. You got it. You got it. I think one thing is that see how positioning for him is going to be pretty crucial. But see how he kind of popped out a little bit.
This is what he does.
And so when he's not going to be weight bearing on his butt, he's going to have a little bit less head control. There. Okay, you're ready. Come on now, can we find Papa now? Oh, other side.
Hey, Camden, turn around.
So right away, she said, nope, he has his tone engaged. He slipped out a little bit. We're repositioning that. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you need a pommel in between his legs or a stronger seatbelt, because the kids with high tone will fight that. As soon as the weight, his body weight is on his hips, he has a whole different position and level of control. So now he's weight bearing on his hips. This is the very first day he's ever been in a wheelchair, power chair, and he's going to be using the head arrays to drive his car, to drive his wheelchair.
Okay, there's go.
Come on, Cam.
Stop. And go. And stop.
Come on, buddy.
Yeah, let's go. Good job.
Go.
Ramps.
Buddy.
Ramps are good.
It's still motorized. I mean, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Let's go.
Up, up, up.
Here we go. Oh, this is gonna be so sweet. You guys can hold hands and go for a walk together.
Okay, how cute is that? And Arlene is a PT, but you know, when he hits go, she says go, and he hits stop, she labels stop. That's what happens when kids take their first steps. We say, you're walking. Oh, bonk, you fell. We give words to what's happening. They take one step, they fall. They take 2 steps, they fall. They get back up or they crawl from there. But they take small steps. Again, this is where children and adults learn very differently, because children are used to learning in the very smallest of increments, especially motor movements. The big thing is on this is that he is an eye gaze user. So I'm not working on switches, but I am making sure that when I'm working with him on his AAC device, that he is weight bearing on his hips and not anywhere else, or he is going to crump. He's going to go to the side like you saw. He's going to look disinterested, and it's because he cannot engage the tone of his core to keep his head up within the range of the eye gaze device. So it all goes together. If I push his hips back and he's weight bearing on his hips, he's sitting straight up. He keeps his head still enough to be accurate on his eye gaze device. And so it's all the same principle. We just found out that about himself because he was so motivated to drive that chair by himself and to his papa, that we were like, man, he wants to do this and he still can't get there. So sometimes we see kids crump over or seem like they're not interested in their language device. And I don't know that we're measuring interest there. I think we may be having them in a position where they couldn't feign interest if they tried to, because we have created a situation where they're leaning against their shoulders, or they're having to buckle their core to feel stable. And so it looks disinterested, but it actually isn't. We don't do joysticks very often with young children because they have to look at that joystick while they're doing it. So again, in the same way, doing switches for AAC with their hands is really successful because they're looking away from their AAC in order to hit the switch, and they can become very perseverative on the switch. So they can they're not even visually attending to their device. They can also become so perseverative on the switch that they're hitting the switch a lot of times with their hand, a movement they can't even do with their head or another area of their body. So the criteria for mobility. So let's think about this. This is the criteria for mobility when we're talking, that they myth bust when we're talking about access to wheelchairs, powered mobility. But the same principles apply for accessing AAC. So let me walk you through it. Maybe the cognition is too low for powered mobility. Oftentimes we think cognition may be too low for AAC. We don't know if they understand the pictures have meaning. We'll wait. We don't know what wait means. Both for powered mobility or for AAC, usually not a lot is happening while we're all waiting for magic. So what we need to do is we need to teach. So cognition is not too low. They have to experience movement and they have to experience language. They experience that symbol. That's how they learn that symbol. They experience that switch. That's how they learn that that means go. They pull off that switch and they stop, and that's how they learn that that means stop. And you show them the symbol of stop, and they hit the button that says stop, and they feel stop. This is what stop looks like. This is what stop feels like. Now you know that word. We have to create these language experiences, and sometimes it is through mobility. The vision is too poor. The vision is no such thing as too poor for mobility. People who are blind are effectively mobile every day, all day. Vision is no such thing. There's no such thing as too poor a vision for AAC. We can work around it. There's ways for them to make choices when they hear the ones they want. If they have some hearing, we can work around the vision. And if they have enough experience, you can work around the vision for mobility as well. So we can't underestimate the experience required. I think we often jump to testing, find the, touch the, and we haven't let them experience the language. We haven't let them experience when I don't pay attention to my motor movement, I pick the one I don't want. We haven't let them experience how their motor impacts what words they select, and the consequences of all of that, so that they can pull it together. Too young, that's also been debunked. Karen Kangas has put kids in empowered mobility as young as 9 months, because there are children that are typically developed that move as young as 9 months, and it works. So same goes for AAC. If typical children are picking out pictures and saying first words at 9-10 months, we should be doing the same with our 9 and 10-month-olds that we believe not to be functionally verbal, because there's no reason to believe that their physical abilities has anything to do with their cognition, and that they're not going to be safe. Well, guess what? No child is completely safe. That's why they're under supervision. So we're not even worried about that. I mean, we're going to continue to monitor all of our children, their mobility and the words they use, as long as they let us, which is for quite some time. So we do start with the head. We adjust the tilt in space to create that situation where you're weight bearing on your hips. If you're not doing powered mobility, this still matters. We start by using some switches on their head, because it's the first thing that you gain as a baby, and it's the last thing you lose, even if you have Parkinson's or ALS. So we know that that's something neurologically that's laid down very, very early on. Even some of our kids born at 25 weeks gestation have head control. So we do have kids born younger and younger, and it's creating a situation where head control is the only thing they have control over. So it's something to consider. And again, it goes back to remembering some of your anatomy and physiology, but in speech pathology, we didn't take a lot of that. We didn't do a lot of this. So it's, again, I think it's been a huge shift for me as a speech pathologist to just be reminded of how all of this goes together, and how there's no such thing as accessing AAC without understanding the human body, and sitting and positioning and level of alertness, and how you have to be seated in order to be in a learning state, and you're not in a learning state all day. And you need short breaks, and that comes to the next one. And the ability to observe and evaluate. I do consults for SETSI, and sometimes they, wheel the little guy in, and we're watching, and within a few minutes, and you will too now, within a few minutes, you'll go, he is in full extension right now, which means he is actually almost laying down and fighting every strap on him. And so most of his weight is actually on his shoulders. So let's change this whole position before we do anything. And it's a game changer. So you have to be able to move a little bit in your seating position, and just strapping people down harder, which some of our people who help fit our children in their wheelchairs aren't helping the cause. Some of them are really good, and some of them are following a well-intended parent's hope that, well, can you just make this strap do this, or can we just strap that down? Sometimes, honestly, sometimes if I unstrap the feet, then they automatically pop out of that extension. Their weight is on their hips and they're good to go. And I give up the fight of having the feet on the footrest. Sometimes that's it. And it's the game changer. So we're going to begin to observe and evaluate this seating with the intention of increasing the level of alertness and creating a tone in their core that allows for intentional movement in their extremities and or their head. That way you can use some of these other alternate accesses. There's head array, there's proximity switches, there's sip and puff, there's modified jacks, there's fiber optics, there's all kinds of things beyond the jelly bean that if you're having difficulty with access and with your jelly bean switch, consider some of these other options, but none of them are going to work without some postural active seating. So I just want to show, oh, I showed the videos already. So all of this seating and positioning applies, and I learned through the power of mobility. But again, if I can apply it when I'm wheeling a child up to a computer, I'm going to take a peek at, are we alert? Just like you might put a child with autism on a bouncy ball so that they can create their own movement required to keep their attention. We would give the same courtesy to those in chairs and say, I'm going to tilt you forward so that you can pay attention. And they may fight it a little, and even they may show shaky head control in the beginning, because it's just like you or I. If we do a plank right now, if you haven't been doing it in a while, everything's going to shake in about a minute. And you will build more core muscles as you practice that control, as you practice pitching that child forward and putting some weight on those hips. They will build control, and you're going to do it in 10-minute increments. But you're going to use that level of alertness to activate switches for mobility, for computers, for environmental controls, for your communication devices, and for your toys, so that they start to realize all the ways that they can access their life, all the ways that they can have control if they only have control of their bodies. And you don't have to say it all, because they feel it and they experience it and they learn it that way. So we're gonna continue to make those sensory accommodations, you know, for our AAC. You know, just because you've pitched them forward and now they're alert and they're ready to go doesn't mean that you fix vision. They may still need high contrast things. They still may need tactile information. They still may need auditory preview. They still may need a toy that vibrates so that they know that when they've even hit that switch, because just because you've created a better seating system doesn't ever fix vision and hearing, but it helps you isolate it. It helps you isolate what you're working on, because they're not fighting their bodies now. So these are some considerations that can be made for visual support, tactile support, vibration for vision issue, for hearing issues. And I have some resources here at the end, but all of those come into play after you have sorted through the seating and positioning pieces. So that is the gist of seating and positioning, that you can refine seating and positioning through the motivation of movement or something that matches their sensory system, which may be extreme visual stimulation or auditory stimulation or tactile stimulation, but movement is a great way to get there. So this is the end of the video. So let me just see if I can stop recording.